Alright, time for the I said time for the fanfiction.
Wow.
It's called A Rosalina by Any Other Name by Imasuki. Summary. Is still just as sexy. Oh great summary.
What? What?
Rosalina landed gently on the soft grass of the planet that she had just discovered. It seemed pleasant enough to stop on to take a break. The sun was just the right distance to keep it nice and warm, without being too hot, and the grass that covered the surface was thick and soft, almost carpet-like. She took a moment to remove her shoes and enjoy the feeling of the warm, soft turf. It felt so nice to stroll through the grass. It didn't scratch or irritate the way most grass would. It was soft and warm, instead, almost ticklish even. A wonderful feeling on her soft, bare feet. Oh god, this is already starting well. There were all sorts of trees and other plants growing about, various large fresh fruit hanging off of each of them. Walking up to one, Rosalina could practically smell how sweet its fruit was. She plucked a particularly nice sample that looked a bit like a strawberry, if strawberries were the size of apples. It had a nice weight, and just holding it she could tell that it was a very juicy one. Rolling it in her palms, she licked her soft lips, looking forward to this as her afternoon snack. Bringing the succulent treat up to her mouth, Rosalina opened wide, showing her perfectly straight and gleaming white teeth. Oh, great. Yeah, you can already guess, Dario, this fanfiction is all about Rosalina.
Well, I mean, it is a fan favorite character.
In a single smooth motion, she bit into it. Right away there was a gush of sweet, light pink juice. It washed down her throat, quenching her thirst as she chewed the soft, tender flesh slowly. Each bite had just enough texture to give her a good sense of what she was eating, while being so light and giving that it was practically melting in her mouth. Sweet with just a hint of tartness, it was one of the single best tasting things Rosalina had ever experienced. Even just a single bite of it put every other meal she had had to shame. She ate it slowly, savoring it carefully, making sure that she chewed each bit through roughly so that she could enjoy it as much as she could. As she finished the fruit, Rosalina licked her fingers clean carefully to make sure she had gotten every drop of the heavenly juice she could. It was only once she was finished did she realize that she had made a complete mess of her dress. It was soaked in juice. The stains were dark and fresh. If one did not know the source, they might assume it was something rather grim. Oops! She giggled a little. In her solitude from all but the lumos, Rosalina had no need to worry about how she looked at or acted. Still, she'd rather not ruin her dress. She was rather fond of it after all. Looking to a nearby pond, she took a moment to glance around. There was, of course, no one anywhere on the little planet. At least no one that she could see, and she could see most of it. She decided it was safe enough to undress. Her dress had just a single zipper down the back that she was able to undo easily, and under it she wore nothing. Oh great. Spending most of her life in lower gravity, she had no real need for a bra. Her dress alone held her breasts comfortably in place. Rosalina's skin was so fair and perfect that in the bright sunlight she was practically glowing like a divine figure. Taking her dress to the pond, she set to work washing out the stains. They luckily were fresh enough that just water was enough to clean them and leave her dress fine, if wet. After laying it out to dry, Rosalina stretched her arms high over her head, just enjoying the feel of the sun and the breeze on her naked body. Strolling around and humming to herself, she went to one of the trees to pick another fruit. Rosalina was delighted to find that it was just as juicy, sweet, and messy as the first. Eating another two afterward, she rubbed her belly, feeling nicely full by this point. Oh god. Going back to the pond, she bathed, washing herself of the wonderful but sticky juices of the fruits. Once she was clean of her meal's remains, she found a nice spot on the shore to take a nap. It was just under a tree, keeping her out of direct sunlight, but still letting her dry properly. Laying down in the soft grass, she looked up at the swaying branches overhead. The gentle sound of them in the soft breeze, combined with the subtle lapping of the water, had her soon drifting off to a blissful sleep. Rosalina was awakened by an odd feeling as something touched her body. It was warm and smooth, rather pleasant in a way, but unexpected. Opening her eyes, she blinked a few times as her eyes adjusted from having just been asleep. Her mind still a bit foggy, but slowly it clicked. A long, thick, green vine was coiled around her body. It was smooth and warm from the sun, and even though it was a plant, she could feel a pulse going through it as it wrapped itself around her body. At the end of it was a large, bright red flower with white dots, which opened like a huge mouth with a set of sharp thorns for teeth. There was thick nectar dripping down, like drool. As Rosalina breathed in, she could smell it. The same lovely sweet scent as the fruit. Rather than a tongue, it had another thick vine that waved about slowly. She could tell at a glance that it was going to swallow her whole! The main body of it was just tight enough to limit her movement, so that she couldn't escape. Not that she wanted to, she realized. For some reason, Rosalina didn't seem to care over much about her predicament. There was none of the panic that part of her knew should be there. There was just a sense of relaxed acceptance. She had eaten fruit, so the plant was going to eat her. That seemed fair, right? Something about that seemed to not fully make sense, but she was too relaxed still to care enough to question it. Her belly was still so full from all that sweet and tasty fruit. If this plant ate her, then the next batch would surely be even tastier. So that was a good thing. Whoever came here next would get an even better meal. As the mouth opened wider, the tongue brushed against her right foot. It seemed as if it was tasting her. Rosalina idly wondered if a plant could actually taste or not. Either way, it was most likely testing to see how fresh she was. The vine licked her foot again and she giggled a bit and wiggled her foot. Oh god. That set off a reaction and it suddenly tightened around her body more, squeezing tighter. It was not going to let go of its prey when it was so fresh that it was still moving, though Rosalina had no intent of escaping. With the little movement she had made, the plant seemed to settle on making the woman into its meal. The tongue lashed along her feet more, covering them in thick, warm, sticky nectar that actually made her skin tingle a little. It was almost like it was making her numb. It was nice in a way. It made her relax a bit more, knowing that she'd not feel anything that happened once she was fully consumed. That had been the only worry she'd been able to vaguely hold on to. Soon the plant took both her feet into its gaping mouth, its vine sliding up her body as its tongue and analog took their place, wrapping around her legs as it started to drag her into its throat, slowly. Rosalina couldn't help but moan softly as she felt her feet slide into the small, tight opening of what would serve as the flower's gullet. It was pulsing with a muscular action, guiding her downwards as the vine tongue kept winding around her up to her knees. Every inch of her skin that it touched was left numb and tingling, and Rosalina couldn't help but find it oddly exciting. Oh, there's this great music again. With some effort, she wiggled her hand loose, enough to slide it between her legs. Her queen was already soaking wet. Though she had managed to reach her pussy, she had also made the plant's prey drive trigger again, as it tightened more around her body. It was squeezing so tight that it bordered on painful. Each breath was short, sharp, and shallow. But she liked it. There was something oddly enjoyable about the intense pressure all over her entire body. She was swallowed up to her knees now, and could feel her feet and lower legs getting squeezed even tighter. Even though the numbness of its nectar, it was an odd, disconnected sensation that she couldn't help but thrill in even more. Using her free hand, Rosalina began to rub her clit. Every tiny stroke sent a surge of pleasure through her body, pure and undiluted as the only sensation she could feel strongly, thanks to the numbing nectar. She was already on the brink of orgasm in seconds! Something about masturbating as she was eating was just making her so much more horny than she had ever been before! As the tongue slithered up her thighs, Rosalina grasped and came. The squirt of her juices seemed to entice the plant, and right away the vine tongue went to lap away at her cunt. The tingling rippled through her body, making her shiver hard enough that the rest of the vines clenched even tighter. It was cutting off her breathing enough now that she could feel her face going red as her ribs strained with every expansion. The feeling was pure bliss, and it was only better as the tongue pushed into her cunt, wiggling deep and stroking her inner walls. Every fold inside her was coated in nectar and left numb and wonderful as it wiggled and writhed inside her, slowly pulling out its liver down and probed into her asshole. For a few moments, going in and leaving her anus tingling and numb in the same way as the rest of her before it began to swallow her whole more. Rosalina began to finger herself again, as hard and fast as the bindings would allow her to. Soon her hips were past the flower's lips and its tongue was around her belly. Even though the numbness now within her pussy, she was still feeling an amazing level of pleasure. Her eyes fluttered as she looked up at the sky one last time. As it slid away, out of view, she could feel herself going down its throat, with her still fingering herself the whole time, teetering on the edge of orgasm as the walls of the vine closed in around her, tighter and tighter. It was getting harder to work her fingers. Soon Rosalina was staring up at the dripping fangs of the plant as they dribbled nectar down onto her face. Opening her mouth, she let it fall onto her tongue. Drinking it down, she felt a wave of intoxication as she came at last, for the last time. Rosalina could hear the jaws snap shut and she was in darkness. Slowly the rest of her body was swallowed up. Between the numbness on her skin and the haze of drinking the nectar, she couldn't tell if she was touching herself or not. All she felt was pressure all over. There was a stronger tingle now that started at her toes. Her breathing was growing slower and more difficult. And then darkness. Peach and Daisy stepped gently onto the soft grass of the planet that Rosalina had last been seen on, finding it pleasantly plush and warm. The air had a soft, sweet scent that was wafting through it, and a small pond that sparkled in the sun. Immediately they saw that Rosalina's light blue dress was resting nearby. "Rosalina!" Princess Peach called out as she began to tentatively walk through the field, following the sweet scent as Daisy went to examine the discarded dress. As the brunette princess picked up the abandoned clothing, she saw that it was covered in seeds from some fruit. They had already started to try to grow through the fabric, with thin roots reaching through it and tiny green sprouts that were reaching out. "Weird," she remarked. From nearby, she heard Peach's cry of shock. Dropping the garment, she ran quickly towards the source of the sound and stood in shock as she saw the fate of both Rosalina and Peach. Rosalina sat in the center of a massive flower, her skin now a soft green. Though her hair was still the same golden blonde and her eyes as bright and blue as they had ever been, her breasts were covered by leaves. Following her figure down, her crotch was also covered by a leaf, and at her knees, her legs merged into a single thick vine that was part of the flower. From the base of that flower there were dozens more vines growing out in all directions. Each was capped with a bright red flower covered in white dots and split in open, drooling mouths that wafted sweet nectar. Peach was half swallowed by one. Her head and torso were already down its throat, her legs dangling from its mouth and kicking a bit as she was being eaten. Although the thin, clear liquid dripping down was not just the plant's nectar. "Hello, Daisy!" Rosalina greeted her cheerfully. "I'm glad you made it, and just in time for a snack." Before the princess of Sarland could react, she was snagged by a vine around her waist and lifted high up into the air right above Rosalina. Looking down, she now realized that the figure of her friend was just the tongue of a massive piranha plant. Rosalina licked her lips as Daisy was lowered towards her, and the petals began to twitch, readying to close around all three women. The end.
Wow.
So yeah, as you can guess, this was war and transformation into a fucking piranha plant.
Amazing. Looks like he had a lot of great ideas.
Great idea! Oh my god.
Somebody hired this man.
Oh my god. How many comments does this have? No comments. No comment.
Nope. Well, I guess such a masterpiece.
You
It
for something.
doesn't even need to say anything.
So additional tags: vor, plant vor, piranha plant vor, mildly dubious consent,
It has to.
transformation, plant transformation, bad ending.
What the fuck? Bad ending. Yes, that's what I want in my fanfictions.
So what other fanfictions did this guy write? What? They wrote a Final Fantasy X fanfiction. Oh god. Oh no.
We must speak with Maester Micah and explain what has happened.
Yeah, exactly. We have to speak with Meister Micah after reading that shit.